So I gotta find out, how many of you feel like you're a real world-changing leader after last week's sermon? Anybody? I got like two hands, three hands, okay. Most of us probably would kind of fall into the other category. We would probably say that I don't really feel like this world-class, world-changing leader. We might say things like, I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I have what it takes to be a world-changing leader. Or, who am I? I'm nobody. I don't have a real position of influence. I'm just really nobody. Many of us feel that way, and I got to confess, I must share with you that for a major portion of my life, I felt like that. I felt like a lot like Moses, standing before the burning bush there on the mountaintop, and God's calling me to do something great, and I'm coming up with a bunch of excuses like Moses did. I'm just not an eloquent speaker, or I just don't have what it takes, or who am I that you would send me? Or probably my favorite one was, God, why don't you just send somebody else? And I think a lot of us, that's the cop-out. A lot of us like to take that road and say, somebody else will take care of it. When some kind of situation arises, we tend to think that somebody else will take care of it. We're driving down the road, we see somebody broken down on the side of the road, and we think, so they've got a cell phone, or somebody will come along and take care of it. They don't need me, Things like that turn up in our lives, and we think, somebody else will take care of it. And so we think to ourselves, well, maybe a good speaker will take care of it, or a good leader, or someone who comes from an affluent family background, who has the money and resources, they'll take care of it. I'm really nobody. And so last week, we kind of talked about what it takes to become a world changer, but very, very seldom do we think that we could ever be the leader, that we could actually take charge and do something about things that are going on around us. We saw through the eyes of Nehemiah last week that it takes compassion. If you want to change the world, you've got to have compassion. You've got to have something in this world that breaks your heart. What breaks your heart? Because chances are what breaks your heart in this world probably, most likely, breaks the heart of God as well. And so we've got to have compassion. Also through the eyes of Nehemiah, we saw that we've got to talk to God about it. We've got to pray about it. We've got to be talking to God about it. Is this something you want me to do, Lord? We've got to check in from time to time. How am I doing, God, on this? And then we saw through the eyes of Nehemiah that it takes action. We've got to get up off our knees. We've got to leave the prayer meetings. We've actually got to go into the word force and do something to make it happen. Now, I pray that God has put something in your heart, that He has shown you that maybe there's something in this world that breaks your heart. And if not, I'm still praying that He does. I'm praying that God will use you to change the world around you. God is going to use you to change the world. Now, today we're going to go back to the book of Nehemiah. This whole series is based on the book of Nehemiah. We're going to go back to Nehemiah. We're going to get into the nuts and the bolts of becoming world changers for Jesus Christ, for God. What does that take? How do I put that together? How do I make it work in my life? So, if you want to use the Bibles in the pews, turn to page 356. 356, there's Bibles in the pews. You can use your own Bibles, that's fine as well. The verses will also be on the screen. So, let's jump in. Now, remember from last week, the walls of Jerusalem, they're in shambles. The people came in, they destroyed the walls, they took some of the people away, they killed some of the people. The walls are in shambles, and they've been like that for over 100 years. The people that were left behind had to put up with a destroyed city. The people felt hopeless, they felt depressed, and we talked about how they felt embarrassed. They were a strong, vibrant country, a strong, vibrant nation. God had used them to do some wonderful things, but they turned their backs on God and had embarrassed Him. And their feelings are, the best days of their lives are behind them. There's nothing to live for. The city looks destroyed. It's pitiful. They've embarrassed and let down the creator of the universe. Now, along comes Nehemiah, He lives 1,000 miles away from the city. And again, my thought is, how in the world can somebody who lives 1,000 miles away even care what Jerusalem looks like? It's 1,000 miles away. I don't care about things that happen outside of our city limits typically, you know. I mentioned that last week. You know, maybe I'll send a check, maybe I'll shoot up a prayer real quick. But that's about the extent of what we typically do when something far away happens. But here's Nehemiah. He lives 1,000 miles away from the city. He hears the devastating news about Jerusalem, and his heart is broken. He's upset about it. He's depressed about it. And he weeps and he mourns and he goes without eating and he talks it to God about the situation. And then he takes action. And so God uses this very ordinary man to do the impossible. God uses this very ordinary man to go into Jerusalem and rebuild its walls in just 52 days. 52 days. And to that I say, to make a difference in this world, you don't have to be the best. You just have to care the most. You don't have to be the best at what you do, but you just have to care the most. You can be an ordinary cupbearer, like Nehemiah was. In other words, you can be an ordinary stay-at-home mom, an ordinary machine operator, an ordinary retiree, an ordinary cashier, whatever you do in your life, you're just an ordinary person. You don't have to be the best at what you do. You just have to care the most about what's going on, about what's breaking your heart for God. You happen to care more than anybody else, and one day you're going to say, somebody has to do something about this, so it might as well be me. It might as well be me. Well, today I want to inspire you, I want to equip you, I want to empower you to see yourself as a world-changing leader. World-changing leader. Many of us, talking to a few of you this morning, many of us don't think that we're leaders. We'd rather just kind of follow the crowd and do what they're doing. But you can be a leader for God. So let's jump in. I want to give you 3 actions. This will separate you from everyone else in the world. We'll look at through the eyes of Nehemiah again, how he became a world-changing leader. I think these are necessary for us as Christians, as people in the world. We need these things in our own lives to change the world around us. So here's what we need. Number 1, a world-changing leader clearly defines the mission. I hope you'll take notes this morning. You'll find in the back of your bulletins a place to take notes. A world-changing leader clearly defines the mission. We're working on that here at First Church. I'm meeting with a group of people, and hopefully along the way, all of us will be involved in this process. But we're trying to figure out, what is the mission of First Church of Christ? What are we going to set out to accomplish? How do we reach the people in our community? What is that simple mission statement? How do we do that? What is the game plan? Okay? So Nehemiah goes before the king to taste the wine, of course, and if the wine is good, as we talked about last week, if the wine is good, Nehemiah lives. If the wine is bad, Nehemiah dies and life goes on. The king hires a new cupbearer and life goes on as normal. So Nehemiah is just an ordinary guy with an ordinary job, and it's pretty dangerous, but he goes in to taste the wine for the king, and King Ardi, as we called him last week, Artaxerxes, King Ardi notices that Nehemiah is kind of depressed. He's down in the dumps. There's a look on his face that tells the king, I'm sad. I'm upset. And so the king Ardi asks him, Nehemiah, what's wrong? What is it? What's bothering you? And so Nehemiah tells King Ardi that he's concerned about the walls of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's in shambles. I'm upset about that. And King Ardi asks Nehemiah, so what is it you want? Plain and simple, what is it you want? Let's pick it up in verse 4 of Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah writes, Then I prayed to the God of heaven. Stop there for a second. Then I prayed to the God of heaven. If you're not talking to God about something you're doing in your life, chances are what you're doing in your life isn't big enough. Think about that. If you think you can just handle things in your life on your own without the help of God, what you're doing in your life isn't big enough. If you want to change the world, you got to be talking to God. You got to be in prayer with God. Are you talking to him? Okay, so he prays to God in verse 5, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried. Now watch, in one simple statement, Nehemiah clearly defines the mission so that I can what? How simple is that? I want to go back to Jerusalem so I can rebuild it. Rebuild it. There were 1,000 things that Nehemiah could have done in the city of Jerusalem. Very broad things that he could have done in the city of Jerusalem. He could have told the king, I'm going back to do political reform. That's pretty broad. I'm going to go back and get rid of the corrupt politicians. That's pretty broad. I'm going to rid the city of cats. Now there's something I can get behind. You give any politician in this city that will run on the basis of getting rid of the cats in this city, I'll vote for him all day long. I've got cats that come into my house. It's bad. Anyway. You know my feelings on cats. We'll stop there. If you have a cat, I'm sorry. This is my personal feeling. I love dogs. So, anyway. He could have done 1,000 other things in this city of Jerusalem. He could have gotten a committee together to form this long, drawn-out purpose statement, mission statement, right? He could have spent thousands of dollars on research to find out which words to use in his purpose statement, which words not to use in his purpose statement. He could have spent the next 8 to 12 months visiting builders of walls to find out what their purpose statements were and how they would craft a complex mission statement to submit to the king. He could have spent all this time and money and effort trying to figure out a mission statement, but no, instead he says to the king, he says in one crisp statement, I'm going to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Very simple. That's his mission. Now, if you were here last Sunday and you heard the message, then some of you probably started thinking about, what could I do to make a difference in this world? What can I do to become a world changer? You probably started talking and thinking about, what breaks my heart? What is it that I just ache over, that God has, put in my life that breaks his heart, breaks my heart at the same time? How can I change my world? I had a guy come up to me after the worship service, and he said very enthusiastically, he says, I don't know what I'm going to do, and I don't know where I'm going to go, and I don't know who I'm going to do it with, but I sure am excited about it. I love that. It's passion, enthusiasm, and we got people excited about doing something to change the world. What is it that breaks your heart? Let me help you narrow it down to a very crisp, clear statement. I want to ask you this question. It's in your notes. What is God calling you to do? What is God calling you to do? He's knocking on your brain. Ooh, I need you to do this for me. What does he want you to do? What does he put on your heart? What is it that breaks his heart and also breaks your heart? And what we need to do is we need to take it from something that's very broad and narrow it down to something that's very easy to understand and very specific. Because I guarantee you, if you can't define it, if you can't define what it is, you can't do it. You can't. You can't just say, I want to help the poor. That's a great mission. I think it's awesome. But how do you define that? Which ones? Do you want to help the ones in the unemployment lines, the ones living under the bridges here in Barberton? Or do you want to help the ones that who have a job but have a hard time making ends meet? You want to help the poor who are also military veterans? Do you want to help the poor, the ones that are living next door to you? Which ones? Not only that, but what does it mean to help the poor? Are you going to give them money? Are you going to open a food pantry? Are you going to take food to them? Are you going to provide clothing for them? How are you going to help the poor? Don't just say, I want to help abused children, or I want to help the disabled, or I want to stop human trafficking. Those are all too broad. How in the world do you jump into that? But if you clearly define the mission, all of a sudden you have something that can generate passion in your life and enthusiasm from like-minded people, because it's very narrow and very specific, and people can say, I want to get on board with that. I want to do something to help you. Clearly define the mission. If you can't define it, you can't do it. You have no idea where to start. The king says, what do you want to do? What do you want to do, Nehemiah? Nehemiah says, I'm going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls, plain and simple. He made it that easy. A world-changing leader clearly defines the mission. What do you want to do? I'll give you the second one. A world-changing leader carefully makes plans. Carefully makes plans. This is so cool. Once Nehemiah knew what he wanted to do, he set forth in motion plans to carry out his mission. He knew what he wanted to do. Now, let's work on the nuts and bolts of this. How do I do this? Once we figure out what we want to do, we need to figure out how we're going to bring it about. Someone once said, when you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So you got to have a plan. Look at Nehemiah's very detailed plans to carry out the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. Verse 6. Nehemiah says, then the king, with the queen sitting beside him. I think that's interesting that he noticed that the queen was also sitting there. Because not only does he have to please a king, he has to please a woman. I'll let your minds get there. Sometimes it's hard to do. So Nehemiah's got to please both of these people. So the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asking, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? And Nehemiah says, it pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. Nehemiah obviously thought this through. He knew how long it was going to take him. He knew when he was going to get there, and how this process was going to work. Then he proceeds to ask the king two specific requests. This is really cool. Verse 7. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah? In other words, would you tell these people, as I travel throughout their countries, 1,000 miles through their countries, protect me. I want a mission here. I don't want to die. Have them protect me. Verse 8. And there's a second request. May I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I occupy. Isn't this really cool? Nehemiah had this all planned out. He knew who the keeper of the king's forest was, and this guy was going to provide the timber, all the timber that he needed for the walls, for the temple, the beams and the gates, and for the place he was going to live. Isn't that cool? He had it all planned out. He didn't know where he was going to live when he got there, so this guy's going to provide him the wood that he needed. He had plans. Nehemiah was so careful in his plans that he included provisions for everything that he would need when he got there. And I think sometimes we Christians tend to think that the planning process isn't very spiritual. You know, we show up to some of these planning meetings and we think, okay, once we get this planned out and started, that's when the spiritual stuff will happen. I want to say to you, that's crazy. I spend a lot of time planning my messages. I want to tell you what, I talk to God a lot about that. Me and the Spirit and I are like, you know, we're a team. We make this happen together. I don't just plan it all out and say, okay, God, bless it now. No, I'm asking God along the way, bless what I'm doing. Help me. Give me the words to say. In our planning process, we find spirituality. So let's say you've got a vision to do something here in Barberton. Let's say you want to stop child abuse. Maybe God wants you to help those in human trafficking, or maybe your heart breaks over some kind of illness or disease like cystic fibrosis, or let's get real crazy. Let's say we got a few women from our church who want to go down to the strip clubs and reach out to the women who are dancing for the people on whatever night of the week. Whoa. Now, those are all good things to have in mind to do. Once again, they're kind of broad and they're just kind of out there. We get these great visions like this. But what's it going to take to actually do it? Prayer. God's power. You can't do those things without it. But when something as big as things like that strike us, what do we think? That's way too big. That is way too big. I don't know what to do next. How do I start? Where do I start? I'm just one little ordinary person. I'm just a cupbearer. How can I do this? Well, let me give you one more practical step in leadership, and it's this. I practice this myself. A lot of the best world leaders do this. Our tendency, before I jump into that practice, our tendency is we want to write down our goals, right? Eliminate poverty. That's a great goal. But we put it down on paper, or we think it in our heads, and we go, how in the world am I going to eliminate poverty? So what ends up happening, we freeze up. There's no way I can do anything about eliminating poverty. So we end up doing nothing. It just sits on our list of things to do. So here's the principle. I don't have this down in your notes, you might want to write this down. Simply define the very next step. Simply define the very next step. What is the smallest next step that I can take to get to my major goal of eliminating poverty, or whatever it is you want to do? Define that step and then take it. So there's something in this world that breaks your heart. You've talked to God about it. What is He telling you to do next? All right, whatever He's telling you to do, the very next step might be that you find out who else in the city might be doing this. Okay? There might be an organization that's already doing what you want to do. That breaks your heart, you want to get involved. What do? So you find out. You do some research on the internet or whatever. That's your next step, you do. What do you do after that? Well, the next step might be, let's set up a meeting with those people. Let's go find out what they're doing. How might I get involved? And so you want to be prepared. What's the next step? You come up with a list of questions. What do you want to ask them? What do you want to find out? That's your next step. That's doable. You write them down. So then what's the next step? You go meet with them. And what's the next step? You learn from them. What's the next step? You go back and maybe put something together. You keep going. What's the next step? How do I get there? What do I do? And how do I accomplish this world-changing vision that God has given me? What's the next step? You don't change the world all at once. You change it one faithful step at a time. Just to find the next step and do it. You're a guy. You're a single guy. I've said this a lot of times, I think, in here. You want to date. What do? What's the next step? Take a shower, put on some deodorant, put down the Xbox controller, and ask a girl out. Alright? It's that simple. You want to change the world, you got to take some small steps to get there. Alright? Simply take the next step. That's what Nehemiah does. If you read his story, he travels 1,000 miles. He goes to Jerusalem. He gets there. The first thing he does is rest. Isn't that cool? He makes this long journey. He says, okay, I just need to relax a little bit. What's the next step? He gets up off his butt or whatever, and he goes out into the city at night. He doesn't want some of the public officials to find out what he's doing, because if they do, they might kill him, or they might send him back to Babylon or whatever. But anyway, he goes out at night, and what's he do? He surveys the rubble. He finds out what condition these walls are really in. By the way, some of people's best work happens while everybody else is sleeping. Isn't that interesting? It's another one of those little leadership principles. While the world is sleeping, some of the best leaders are out there working. I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, so he's out there. He does a survey. What's his next step? Well, he gathers all the information. He gathers a group of people. He can't do it by himself. He gathers a group of people to passionately inspire them. Nehemiah clearly defines the mission. He carefully makes plans. And third, he passionately inspires people into action. Isn't it sad? And the church in America today is very uninspirational. I mean, people, we've got the best gift in the world in Jesus Christ. The gospel, the good news that Jesus came into this world as a man, lived as a human being, was tempted, was without sin, went to the cross, died on the cross for our sins, the whole world's sins, that we might have life eternal in heaven with him. Went to the grave, defeated death, rose from the grave to give us hope of eternal life in heaven. Isn't that awesome? And yet we're so uninspirational about that. What is up with that? We need to be in the world passionate about what Jesus Christ has done for us. Because if we are, we'll be busting out the seams. This place will be vibrant. But we're so uninspirational. Are we really excited about Jesus Christ and what he's done for us? I don't know. Nehemiah gets excited about building a wall. Building a wall. A world-changing leader knows if you want to change the world, then you need other people to buy into the vision that God has given you. That's what Nehemiah does. Verses 17 and 18. Nehemiah says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." Nehemiah says, hey, look what's going on here. The city's in shambles. This is terrible. We've got to do something about this. And so, verse 18, I also told them about the gracious hand, of my God upon me, and what the king had said to me. I've been blessed, Nehemiah says. So they replied, let's start rebuilding. They couldn't help themselves. I'm excited about this. We're going to build a wall. And so they began this good work. If you clearly define the mission, if you carefully make plans, if you care so much that you get this need deep within your heart, then when you gather people together, you can inspire them. You might say, but I'm not naturally an inspirational leader. I'm telling you right now, Nehemiah was a cupbearer. You can't get much more inspirational or less inspirational than that. He was just a guy who wasn't the best, but he cared the most. Right? When he stood before the people, these people realized, man, this dude came from 1,000 miles away to do something about our city. I don't know everything that Nehemiah says, but I kind of have an idea that when he said what he said to those people, you could see the passion in his heart. You could see it. You could feel it radiating from him. He was excited about doing something for his city. They could tell, this guy cares. You could see it. John Wesley said this, light yourself on fire with passion, and people will come from miles to watch you burn. Isn't that cool? But it's true. You get excited about something and people will join the mission that God has called you to accomplish. And Nehemiah says, I think he says this to the people. Do you think this is acceptable to God? These broken down walls, this city in shambles. Do you think this is acceptable? Our people are vulnerable. We're not honoring our fathers and mothers who've gone before us. We're not building a city that would protect our future children and grandchildren. The temple is not what it should be to honor our God. This is a disgrace. Nehemiah, he says, come on guys. Everybody says it can't be done. I'm telling you, the hand of God is with us. God is with us. God is with us. How many times did he say that? I can just hear him passionately inspire these people to do something because their city is terrible right now. Nehemiah probably said, God touched the heart of a king. I was serving his court. He touched his heart. He had no reason to empower me to do what I'm doing here. God is with us. You're going to have opposition. You need to know this. There are people that are going to come along and they're going to oppose what we're doing. But that's okay. We're going to get through it. We're going to work around the clock. We're going to hurt. We're going to ache. Our knuckles are going to be raw. Our hands are going to be calloused from shoveling and digging and setting stone, and our feet are going to ache, and we're going to love every minute of it. And Nehemiah goes on because we're doing something great to honor our God. and we're going to make his people strong again. How could you not get behind that? I don't know how to build a wall, but I sure want to do it now. Thanks, Nehemiah. He passionately inspired these people. In that passion, a group of people follows this leader. They thought it was impossible. And they realized that with God, all things are possible. God rose up an ordinary cupbearer to be a world-changing leader. And I'm here to tell you, God can do the same thing with you. He can do something through you, with you, for you, that can just change the world around you. We got to get outside of ourselves, though. We got to get into the Spirit of God. It's the Spirit of God who leads us. God wants to use you. You may not be the best, but you care the most. You don't have to be the best. You just have to have a heart that breaks for the things that breaks the heart of God. And then, we can't just sit around and ache and whine about it. Oh, poor kids who are abused, poor this, poor that. No. Somebody's got to do something about it, so why not let it be you? Why not you? Don't let this just be a burden that's too big for you to fix. Do something about it. So, clearly define the mission. Carefully lay out the plans that you need to take to get there. Keep asking the question, what's the next step? If that's inside of you and you're around people, the passion will just flow. People will come for miles just to watch you burn. And they'll get behind you and do something. That's what I'm praying for.